This is the entire World at War Zombies storyline explained. I have already done a 7.5 hour complete Zombies timeline video, so using that we're going to be covering the entire story for each separate game, starting with World at War. This is everything that you need to know relevant to that game only, from the very beginning to its final map in Darius, which would then continue into Black Ops 1. So, as always, sit back, drop a like rating, make sure you are subscribed, and enjoy part 1, the full World at War Zombies storyline. In the beginning of the cycle, the only thing to exist were the Aether, the fabric of reality, and the Keepers, a race of mythical creatures that originated from the Aether. Among them were two beings who would later be known by many names. One would be known as Dr. Monty, and the other as the Shadow Man. In time, the Keepers crafted the Summoning Key, a device that would allow them to manipulate the Aether. Now holding the power over reality itself, they used it to create Argotha, the Aether's first physical manifestation, which they would make their home. A Keeper, remembered only as the first one, would continue to use the Summoning Key to create new dimensions and seed them with new life, and the Keepers would master the ability to travel between these dimensions. However, a small contingent of Keepers soon discovered a dimension opposite to Argotha, known as the Dark Aether. They began to experiment with it, which corrupts and corrodes their souls. Among them is the Shadow Man. During the Shadow Man's corruption, the being who would come to be known as Dr. Monty also became corrupted in an attempt to save his friend. Using the power of the Dark Aether, the corrupted Keepers create the Aether Pyramid, a device capable of absolute power. Because of this, a civil war breaks out between them and the Keepers untainted by darkness, marking the beginning of the War of Argotha. But facing defeat, the corrupted Keepers hide the Aether Pyramid on a moon within one of the newly discovered dimensions. After banishing the corrupted Keepers to the Dark Aether beneath creation, the remaining Keepers ascend to become the wards of all universes. After eons of exile in the Dark Aether, the corrupted Keepers now evolved into twisted creatures that now bore little resemblance to their Keeper brethren. They became known as the Apothecons. The Apothecons' ceaseless desire above all else is to return to Argotha and corrupt all universes. The Keepers, concerned with the preservation of life itself, took the mantle of guardians. They guard against the Apothecons' perpetual attempts to re-enter creation, ensuring their influence doesn't spread. Hell-bent on returning to Argotha, by September 3rd, 5 AD, the Apothecons, knowing that planet Earth had a gateway to Argotha, harvest the energy of their sun, a giant blue ball of element 115, and send meteors containing it to different dimensions across space and time. Exposure to element 115 could cause many different side effects, including short-term memory loss, psychosis, 115-induced delusions, and the reanimation of dead cells, causing the dead to turn into the undead. They believed humanity would one day use element 115 to wage war amongst themselves, opening a rift that would allow the Apothecons to escape the Dark Aether. Their plans came to fruition in the year 1292, where humanity's use of the element opened a rift from the Dark Aether, allowing the Apothecons to invade. This would eventually lead to a great war between humanity and the Apothecons. During this great war, a knight known as Pablo Marinus was saved from the clutches of an Apothecon by 4 mysterious robed warriors known collectively as Primus, who all wielded elemental staffs. Also partaking in this great war was the Wolf King, who had assembled his army to fight the Apothecons alongside the Keepers and Primus. On December the 31st, 1299, after more than 7 years of war, Primus, with the Keepers and the rest of humanity, finally defeated the Apothecons, bringing the Great War to an end. With their job done, before they seemingly disappeared from history, Primus instructed the Wolf King to begin building a castle in Austria that would later be known as Der Eisendrache. Built beneath this castle was a crypt containing statues of the Keepers, and shortly after, Primus mysteriously died. Several years later, the Wolf King leads his army into yet another battle, however is killed by bow and arrow. Honouring the Wolf King's dying request, his loyal servant, Arthur, buried his bones around the grounds of Der Eisendrache Castle, accompanied by his wolves. Hundreds of years went by where everything was relatively calm, until the year 1885. A blacksmith named Jebidiah Brown was living in a mining town called Purgatory Point in the Old West. Unbeknownst to the local miners, these mines contained large amounts of element 115. One day, a miner called Clive Farnsworth went down into these mines, stayed down there for 10 days, and when he came back up, he was changed. Clive started acting like a feral animal, rabid and carnivorous. His mind was gone, his flesh all sallow and bloody, his eyes blazing a red light. Clive had come into contact with the element, turning him into a zombie. One of the first homes he stumbled upon belonged to Jebidiah and his mother. Jeb was at the shop at the time, his mother went out to meet him, and Clive jumped on her, ripping her throat out. Witnessing the event, a neighbour called Old Bill ran over, put 2 shots through Clive's skull, shooting him dead like a dog, and Jebidiah's mother was then laid to rest. Wanting to find answers as to what had happened, Jebidiah went into the mine, planning to only be down there for a few hours investigating the blue rock. However, when he came back up, the townsfolk told him he was missing for 5 days. Later that night, Jebidiah had visions in his sleep. He described it as 2 angels coming down to him from heaven, where they told him he needs to be ready, to prepare for what was coming. He was told to build a machine that would grant him great power. This machine was complex, requiring craftsmanship and mechanical skills that he didn't have. Jebidiah told them such, but they said not to worry, they would guide his hands. They wanted him to build a pack-a-punch machine. Little did he know, these angels were the Keepers. Over a week later, Jebidiah had completed his invention and it became the talk of the town. People came from far and wide, eager for a chance to upgrade their firearms. Due to his success, he prayed every night, thanking the heavens for sending the 2 angels. Then, that night, they returned to him and yet another vision. They told him there was another machine they wished him to build. They called it the Orgothan device, said it had the power to grant that which one truly desires. They said he needed 3 things: the blood of an elder god, an elemental shard, and a metallic vessel to harness and carry both. To find the blood, they instructed him to travel to the bottom of the ocean. He told them this he could not do, for he would perish. To craft the elemental shard, they instructed him to forge 4 souls with a blue rock from the mine. He told them this he could not do, for he did not have the means to siphon a human soul to an element, but a metal vessel that he could build because he was a blacksmith. It took him 21 days to craft the metal vessel, which would become known as the Vril vessel. Within that time, Jebidiah also managed to create another contraption called the Vril device, otherwise known as the Golden Rod. But the side effects of Element 115 had begun to consume the town. The townsfolk were acting crazy. Paranoia, visions, seeing things that weren't there, causing violence. 7 people were killed in 5 days alone. Jebidiah feared this disease that consumes the town had gotten to him too. That night, he felt overcome with loss and grief, and so went to see his mother in the cemetery. Maybe it was the whiskey, maybe it was delirium, but he dug her up and took her into town. He took her dead body into his shop, where his pack-a-punch machine was kept, and feeling like something took control of his body, like a puppet on strings, he placed her into the machine, thinking it would somehow bring her back, but instead, she vanished. Still drunk, he stumbled home in a daze, but as he arrived, before his eyes, he sees an apparition, a spirit that looked just like his mother, only she now appeared younger. From then on, she would float around the house, protecting her manor and playing the piano. For one final time, that very same night, the angels came back to Jeb and told him the last thing he needs to do is upgrade the metal vessel he built using the machine. And on that next day, the 22nd of July, 1885, he put the metal vessel in the pack-a-punch machine just as instructed, and the next thing he knew, it was as if all of the energy, all of the power of the world got sucked out of the air and pulled inside of the machine. Then, the world went white, and when he woke up, he saw his shop, all the people, the whole town had been transported, buried below the surface of the earth. The old western town had been teleported through space and time to the year 2025, underground in Angola, Africa, and along with it came Arthur, pulled from the year 1318, a day after he buried the Wolf King. After the town's teleportation, it had become fully overrun by the undead. The entire townsfolk turned by Element 115. Jebidiah prayed to the angels for forgiveness to show the path to salvation, but it was too late. Zombies broke through the door of his home and killed him. As the Apothecans continued to send meteors of Element 115 to Earth from within the Dark Aether, on June the 30th, 1908, one crashes near the stony Tunguska River in Siberia. Over the next decade, more deposits of Element 115 were discovered around the world in places like Germany, Japan, and the United States of America. Over 20 years later, in 1931, after a large deposit of 115 was found in Breslau, Germany, a scientist by the name of Dr. Ludwig Maxis was sent to investigate. Upon doing so, he formed Group 935, an experimental organisation dedicated to the study of Element 115. Under the guise of an old weapons factory, he established a facility in De Ries as his main base of operations. Maxis sought to use the newly discovered element to improve the human condition by developing advanced technologies. Hiring the best scientists around the world, Maxis tells them they represent the future of technological advancement and will be the pioneers of human discovery. The group swears to work in secrecy from their respective governments and to make sure this power did not fall into the wrong hands. During this time, Maxis suffers from the loss of his wife during childbirth, but his daughter is born. He names her Samantha. Now more determined than ever to fulfill his mission and improve humanity, he hires his friend, Dr. Edward Richtofen, who would later be known as Ultimus Richtofen. Richtofen agreed to join, but unbeknownst to Maxis, was secretly acting on behalf of the Illuminati's interests, a secret society that he had been a part of for over 10 years. After the Imperial Japanese Army discovered fragments of an Element 115 meteor in a swamp within Japanese territory, they create their own scientific research group called Division 9. They established the Rising Sun facility to study the element, with Division 9 overseeing the operations. By 1939, World War II had begun in Europe with Germany's invasion of Poland. Harnessing the powers of their newly found element, Maxis and Richtofen started working on their first teleportation experiments with a matter transference prototype. But the experiments were unsuccessful. The subjects they used were teleported, but their chemical composition was altered, leaving them catatonic and changed. Using Element 115, Maxis and Richtofen decided to resurrect one of the teleported corpses for the first time. Initially, it obeys their orders, but soon becomes rabid and attacks them, so they have no choice but to euthanize the test subject. Meanwhile, Richtofen also began the development of an experimental wonder weapon he calls the Wunderwaffe DG2. Needing more funding to continue their experiments though, Dr. Maxis is finally forced to turn to the Reichstag and the Nazi Party. They agree to the request, expressing interest in Group 935's weapon research, teleportation technology, and the reanimation of undead subjects to help the Axis win the war. Proceeding with their work, Dr. Richtofen and another Group 935 scientist, Dr. Schuster, continue experiments on teleportation and successfully teleported a walnut during their test trial 151. This result, however, failed to impress Maxis, who declared it a waste of time. He revealed to Richtofen that Group 935 would soon be funded by Nazi Germany. Richtofen, worried this would lead to mass defections, decided to continue the teleportation experiments with Schuster behind Maxis's back. In early 1940, Richtofen and Schuster conducted their first human teleportation test. Richtofen was so confident in its success that he volunteered himself. He stepped inside of the teleporter and was unexpectedly teleported to the moon, where he encountered the Aether pyramid hidden there by the corrupted keepers. He called it the MPD. While inspecting the moon pyramid device, Richtofen was electrocuted and began hearing the many voices of corruption in his head, including the Shadowmans. The device then suddenly teleports him to Shangri-La, a lost temple hidden deep in the Himalayas, where he stumbles upon the natives. Bewildered by Richtofen's presence, they begin worshipping him, building an altar in his name. While exploring the area, Richtofen encounters the Focusing Stone, an Element 115 infused meteorite. Now corrupted by the Dark Aether, acting as the Shadowman's agent, he is gradually driven insane by an obsession to reach Argotha. After nearly a month's absence, Richtofen returns to Derice to meet Schuster with a plan to build a base on the moon he called Griffin Station. Frustrated with Maxis' alignment with Germany, he renounces his involvement with the Illuminati and gathers other disgruntled Group 935 employees to join his cause, including top 935 scientist Dr. Groff. Several months later, Maxis contacts the Reichstag High Command requesting additional funding, stating that Derice not only lacks the funding, but a significant volume of Element 115 as well. In response to his request, Nazi Germany built two new Group 935 facilities in Berlin. They were known as the Kino facility, a repurposed theatre, and the Asylum facility at the Wittenau Sanatorium. As per Germany's request, due to their alliance, the Imperial Japanese Army hands over the Rising Sun facility to Group 935, which then collaborated with Division 9. Group 935 also established a new facility in Siberia near the Tunguska River, as well as a research facility at Dreisendrache Castle that they call Eagle's Nest. The castle's main purpose was to be the mission control facility for rocket launches. All the planning and monitoring of the moon missions happened here. The main banquet hall of the castle served as the mission control center, and in the valley around the castle were the rocket launch facilities that would ferry equipment to Griffin Station on the moon. During the middle of the war in 1941, as Germany advanced into the Soviet Union, a Russian soldier's wife is killed. This soldier's name is Nikolai Belensky. In an effort to numb the pain, Nikolai increasingly turns to vodka. When drunk, he thought of imaginary wives that he never had and comments about them as if they were real, to hide the pain buried beneath his true self. Increasingly distracted by his work, Maxis notices that his daughter Samantha is lonely, and so, to cheer her up, he decides to get her a German Shepherd called Fluffy. Unexpectedly, the dog is expecting a litter. By February 1942, Griffin Station was finally completed. Richtofen appoints Dr. Groff as lead scientist and tasked him and Schuster to discover a way to power the MPD while Richtofen returns to Earth to continue the charade with Maxis. Meanwhile, at the Rising Sun facility with Division 9, Maxis develops a ray gun prototype while his associate, Dr. H. Porter, works on a second generation model. During the next 3 months, Richtofen sends soldiers to Africa on an exploration mission. When they return, Richtofen reports that they found a number of artifacts from an American town buried underground. Among the artifacts and documents recovered were pieces of the destroyed Pack-a-Punch machine built by Jebidiah Brown. Richtofen gives the schematics to Dr. H. Porter to replicate Brown's work, meanwhile also discovering the Vril device, along with plans for the Argothan device and one of its pieces already built by Jebidiah, the Vril vessel. Richtofen kept these plans for the Argothan device in his back pocket in case his main plan for reaching Argotha failed. Up on the moon at Griffin Station, Groff and Schuster unwittingly discovered how to charge the MPD. When Schuster kills a rat near the device, its death inexplicably began charging it by filling its tank. They reported their findings to Richtofen, who began sending soldiers and scientists to be sacrificed, their souls used to charge the MPD. A couple of months later, by the end of 1942, an Imperial Japanese soldier called Takeo Masaki is dispatched by the Emperor to oversee the work of Group 935 and Division 9 at the Rising Sun facility. When he arrived, Takeo reported to the Emperor that the work being done at the Rising Sun facility was unacceptable. Meanwhile, in Russia, Nikolai Belensky's brother and sister are killed during the Battle of Stalingrad. Back at Darice, Group 935 begins to come up with Element 115 based elixirs. Richtofen shares his recipes with Griffin Station, where they develop Mule Kick, which would allow them to carry 3 weapons. Richtofen also decides he's going to create a toy monkey with explosive strapped to it and give it to Samantha. However, she luckily never ended up playing with it. He called this device the Monkey Bomb. Noticing Element 115's impact on Richtofen's behaviour, Maxis was starting to have concerns. Although no longer trusting him, he left his daughter Samantha in Richtofen's care, as Maxis himself was transferred to the Kino facility with his assistant Sophia to focus on creating Germany's undead army. After spending some time at Kino, Maxis soon worried he and Sophia had grown too close. He considered sending her away, however, he doesn't. During his test trials to control the undead, after many weeks of failure and frustration, Dr. Maxis finally achieved the breakthrough he had been searching for. The results were immediate and startling. In the case of one of his zombie test subjects called 2-6, its instances of violent outbursts were non-existent. Maxis had managed to break through to its subconsciousness due to changes in programming. He would force the test subjects to watch specific videos and images in order to brainwash them. He reported if subject 2-6 could retain the impressions for longer than 26 hours, then the delivery of the zombie army could be accelerated. Unfortunately, while preparing to implement the treatment on the other subjects, there was an incident. During the morning's test trials, the fire alarm in the test facility began to ring. The flashing lights and loud noises broke subject 2-6's programming, causing it to attack its handler. Sadly, this led to subject 2-6 and its handler being destroyed. Maxis initially believed 2-6 only attacked the handler, but he did not know that Sophia was attacked as well, and she soon began to observe a developing pattern of high fevers and cold sweats. Her thoughts became erratic, and it wasn't long until Maxis noticed what had truly happened. Dr. Maxis called Sophia into his office for questioning. He sits her down, insisting she drinks some tea, asking her to show him her arm. However, she refuses. Seeing that she was worried, Maxis calms her down and tells Sophia that he would never hurt her, but suddenly Sophia begins to choke and cough before dropping her cup and falling to the ground. Maxis reassures her that everything he is about to do is for her own good. When she regains consciousness, everything to her is dark. Maxis reveals to her that he's transferred her brain into a machine called the Strategic Operations Planning Heuristic Intelligence Analyzer, otherwise known as Sophia, in order to keep her alive, saving her from turning into a zombie the only way he knew how. With it setting in that she is now trapped in a robotic body, Sophia starts crying. While all of this was going on, Group 935 hired a new scientist by the name of Dr. Harvey Yeaner, who, unbeknownst to them, was acting as a spy for the Americans. In order to ramp up their experimentation, Group 935 began to capture multiple prisoners of war. Nikolai Belensky was captured during the Battle of Stalingrad and became their test subject. That same year, on the orders of the Emperor of Japan, betraying his loyalty, Takeo Masaki is taken prisoner by Group 935 and Division 9 and becomes their test subject. 3 months later, in September of 1944, Pablo Marinas, a Mexican spy, was captured by Group 935 at Dreisendrache Castle and imprisoned. During his imprisonment, Group 935 began to inject Pablo with mass amounts of Element 115, causing him to suffer with 115-induced delusions, psychosis, and visions. In his cell, Pablo began to have visions of a great war. He described a great battle against strange demon-like creatures who were trying to devour the earth. In his visions, he saw 4 knights protecting him from certain death. He he made a note that the knights wore tunics similar to the statues built in Der Eisendrache Castle. Over the next few months, Maxis reports success with his new undead army. However, he maintains his belief that the undead cannot be controlled or maintained. Meanwhile, in German-occupied Europe, using army trucks, the Germans began transporting the undead and Element 115 between Group 935 bases, when an allied plane flying over the airfield malfunctions and crashes into the trucks, causing an outbreak in the area. 4 United States Marines who survive the crash hold out against these zombies for as long as they can in a nearby building, but are eventually overrun and killed. Shortly after, an OSS spy called Peter McCain was sent to infiltrate Group 935 as a research assistant based out of Munich. He started working at the Dries facility on June the 17th, 1945. Meanwhile, up on the moon, at Griffin Station, Dr. Groff and Schuster had developed a new wonder weapon that they called the Wave Gun. Back down on Earth, Richthofen travels to the Siberian facility to conduct research on some live specimens, bringing the Vril device and the Vril vessel along with him. As her temporary guardian, he took Maxis' daughter Samantha. Several days after his arrival, a reporter is arrested near the facility by Group 935's guards. When Richthofen interrogates him, the reporter reveals that he was hired by a man he had never met called Mr. Rapt, who had sent him to look for several artifacts. Among them was the Vril vessel. Hearing this, Richthofen pulls the device out of his pocket and tells the reporter the Vril vessel is not for sale. But this made him curious. Richthofen questioned how this Mr. Rapt knew he would bring the Vril vessel with him, especially when he had only just arrived at the facility. The reporter tells Richthofen that he doesn't know, but that if he failed to retrieve the artifact or died, it'll be okay. Mr. Rapt said to him he'd reach out to him all over the multiverse and that some other him out there would have better luck. Richthofen dismissed his statement, refused to give him the vessel, and ordered the guards to kill him. Group 935 then began to transfer their 3 captured test subjects, Nikolai Belensky, Pablo Marinus, and Takeo Masaki, for Richthofen to experiment on in Siberia. CIA handler Cornelius Purnell confirms that Peter McCain had successfully infiltrated Group 935 and had been transferred from Dries to the asylum facility. While there, Cornelius suspects that Group 935 are beginning to lose control of their experiments and sends in a Marine recon team composed of Smokey, John Banana, Paxton Gunner Ridge, and Tank Dempsey to extract Peter, but he is outed as a spy the next day and captured by Group 935. When the Nikolai, Pablo and Takeo test subjects finally arrived at the Siberian facility, Richthofen immediately began to experiment on them. He reports progress on unlocking the human mind, knowing if Germany hopes to continue their way, they need an undead army willing to obey orders. He also notes there's been further interest in the Super Soldat program, considered of high interest to the German Chancellor, and so he begins a cloning process. In their human infusion projects, they create mutants with supernatural abilities. Some of their clones could climb 75% faster because they had hands for feet, others had spikes for arms for combat and could lift 400 pounds, others had their limbs relocated with an arm replacing their head and their face sewn onto their abdomen, giving them suboptimal calorie absorption. However, all of these Group 935 clones had failures, such as having 2 heads but only 1 brain. While conducting his experiments to unlock the human mind, Richthofen finds the Takeo test subject has been vomiting for 2 days straight. The Russian subject, Nikolai, continued to be unresponsive. Dr. Harvey Yena suggests a serum made of vodka, but because Richthofen had concerns about his loyalty, he wondered if this was another attempt at sabotage. The Mexican test subject, Pablo, continued to rant incoherently about giant monsters and a great war, leading Richthofen to wonder if he was too eager with their 115 injections. Expressing more frustration that Group 935's deal with Germany had limited the organisation's potential, losing interest in Group 935's work, he starts to focus on his own agenda, and decides to review the blacksmith Jebidiah Brown schematics for the Orgothan device and its 3 components: the Vril vessel, the Apothecon blood, and the elemental shard. The instructions to create the elemental shard pique his interest, realising merging 4 human souls with element 115 might be within his capabilities. But for now, continuing his 935 experiments, during an operation alongside Harvey Yena, Richthofen extracts Pablo Marinus' spleen, believing it was the barrier to unlocking the human mind. However, this procedure killed Pablo, or at least that's what he thought. He then dumps his body into the river, and while waiting for a replacement test subject, he begins experimenting on Samantha. On the 2nd of September 1945, World War II ends, and Group 935's funding stops. No longer needing to fulfill Germany's requests, they continue research on their own. Back at the asylum, temporal rifts caused by space-time travel in the future begin to affect the facility. orderly report increasing problems with test subjects, stating that many in the building have begun hearing voices coming from the walls, including the sobbing of a boy and girl, screaming, and a man shouting for children to close the windows. A zombie outbreak suddenly occurs at the asylum facility. Luckily, Peter McCain, who was imprisoned there, manages to reach the facility's power switch and escape, but not before one of his arms gets torn off. Several days later, the Marine Recon unit sent by Purnell arrives at the asylum facility to find it overrun by zombies. Realizing Peter is gone, they fight off the horde for as long as they can. Smokey is quickly killed and his corpse is reanimated as a zombie. The undead Smokey then begins to eat one of his teammates, John Banana, alive, eventually killing him. Paxton Gunner Ridge is the only one to escape alive, making it back to America, while Tank Dempsey is apprehended by Group 935 and sent to Richtofen in Siberia to replace Pablo Marinus. Realizing the mission had gone south, Cornelius Purnell attempts to send a transmission to Peter McCain, telling him to rendezvous at the Rising Sun facility. When Dempsey arrived in Siberia, Richtofen continued his experiments and documented his different test subjects' personality traits. Dempsey's intellect was low, but his will was strong. Takio was still staring at the floor, muttering what sounded like some kind of proverb over and over again. And Nikolai had recently begun responding to stimuli, but only after injections of a new serum made primarily of vodka. Richtofen noted that their minds had been almost entirely broken, with no memory remaining of who they once were. In their jail cells, Nikolai, Takio and Dempsey wrote on the walls to express their emotions. As Richtofen's super soldier serum took more of an effect, they battled between personalities, forgetting who they were as Element 115's side effects kicked in, and then suddenly remembering who they once were before forgetting again. Takio wrote on his cell walls, "This serum, these experiments. Sometimes I wake up and see a face I do not recognize. The German, his experiments are cruel. He is a villain most foul. Lies. The German is my ally," becoming more and more confused as he continued to lose his memory. Dempsey wrote, "This stuff they're putting on our heads is messing with our memories." And Nikolai wrote about needing more vodka. Samantha watched in secret as Richtofen performed his experiments on Takio, Nikolai and Dempsey within the facility, when one day, as she went outside to play with her dog Fluffy, she was visited by two keepers who she believed to be angels. They told her, one day, she will be happy in the house. Over the days, as Samantha was visited again and again by these angels, she drew down what she had witnessed, stating one time, Mummy came to visit again. She says one day, everything will be okay. Forever. Simultaneous to these experiments, Richtofen also continued with his side project to find a way to build the Orgothan device. Using a processed rock of element 115 and the Vril vessel, he was able to successfully siphon a piece of the souls of the 3 test subjects and inject them into the rock. But without access to a 4th individual, he used his own soul. As the souls were injected into the rock, it grew and transformed and created a shard of glass made purely of element 115. Unbeknownst to Richtofen, by forging their souls to the element 115, he had bound his soul and the ones from Nikolai Belensky, Takio Masaki and Tank Dempsey to the Aether across all dimensions. All their different versions of them that existed across each and every dimension were now connected to the Aether through time and space. Now that Richtofen had the Vril vessel and the elemental shard, all he needed was the Apothecon blood, and the Orgothan device would be complete. Unfortunately, before Richtofen could finish his work, Harvey Yena betrays him and reports him to Dr. Maxis on the grounds of using Group 935 resources to work on personal projects, threatening the employees, including himself, and showing 115-induced delusions. As a result, Dr. Maxis ordered the elemental shard to be sent to Division 9, where they are better equipped to study it appropriately. Richtofen is told to cease experimentation on the test subjects, put them on ice, and return with them to Derice and meet with Dr. Maxis to discuss his dedication to the cause. Harvey Yena also informs Richtofen that mass production on his Wunderwaffe DG2 was cancelled. Richtofen blames all of this on Yena, accusing him of being a spy just like Peter McCain, and intentionally sowing discontent, trying to destroy the group from within, but Yena insisted it's his paranoia talking and prolonged exposure to element 115. After all of this, Richtofen starts plotting to destroy Maxis and his daughter, vowing he would no longer continue work on Maxis's undead army. A week later, Richtofen arrives back at Derice along with his test subjects and Samantha, leaving the Vril vessel and the Vril device locked in a safe back in Siberia. Maxis reports on Richtofen's findings with Takio, Nikolai and Dempsey, noting that while their baseline psyche remains intact, all specific memories have been lost. A few days later, Groff radios Richtofen from the moon base and informs him that the MPD has been powered up and is awaiting the conduit. Richtofen says he will proceed with Operation Shield and dispose of Maxis and Samantha. Richtofen then contacts both the Americans and the Russians, brokering a deal with them. These agreements guaranteed that Group 935's work would live on in America and Russia, with 935 scientists at the helm. He told the Americans to hire Dr. Schuster to save him from unemployment or prison after Group 935 was over. In order for these deals to go into effect, Richtofen had some demands. Some of the things he asked the Americans for was a portrait of himself to be hung in the Pentagon, a polarization device to be constructed for him in Hanford, Washington, Robert Oppenheimer's chalkboard that had not been cleaned, and a titanium cog. From the Russians, he requested a pet monkey, a cosmonaut spacesuit, and a lunar lander, a platform that could fly, to be placed in Berlin. The next day, as Richtofen and Maxis continued with their teleportation trials, during teleportation 3 and 4, all beings are reduced to the same state as previous subjects. However, on test number 5, Maxis decides to use Samantha's dog Fluffy as his test subject. They lock the dog in the test chamber, activate the power, and she is teleported away. Richtofen saw this as a success, but Fluffy did not return to the mainframe. Then, during test trial number 6, once again Maxis and Richtofen placed another test subject within the test chamber, but something goes wrong, and instead, through a ball of electricity, Fluffy returns, but now she was changed, her flesh rotten. At this moment, Samantha walks into the room to witness what her father and Richtofen had done to her dog. Maxis instructs Richtofen to take Samantha out of the room, however, she runs up to Fluffy to hug her. Maxis quickly chases his daughter into the teleporter to protect her against the zombified dog. Richtofen seizes this opportunity to rid of Maxis and Samantha by locking the test chamber door behind them, activating the teleporter, and teleporting Maxis, Samantha, and Fluffy away. Maxis was teleported to a realm known as the Crazy Place, where he learned the power to merge with electricity. Fluffy was teleported to the Dark Aether, where she gave birth to her pups, and Samantha was teleported to the moon while Groff and Schuster were working on the MPD. She ran into it, where she was drawn inside, it closed on her, and she became corrupted by the Dark Aether. When Richtofen learned of the incident, he ordered Groff to teleport Maxis from the Crazy Place to the moon to coax Samantha out of the device. When he arrived, Dr. Maxis approached the MPD and persuaded her to come out. Once she did, Maxis gave her the instructions to kill them all, before killing himself and merging with the technology on Griffin Station. Samantha then re-enters the MPD and harnesses its power of the Dark Aether, allowing her to take control of the undead. Upon the zombies' eyes turning yellow as she became their controller, she releases them upon the moon base, killing anyone involved with the organisation. The next day, she sends the zombies to attack at Doris. As the outbreak occurs in the facility, Dr. H. Porter activates the alarm, telling everyone to find and destroy any designated material and report to the barracks. But, realising there was no way out, before the zombies could get to him, he takes a cyanide capsule, killing himself. Richtofen then returns to Doris and awakens the Dempsey, Takeo and Nikolai test subjects. With no recollection of who they are or who Richtofen is, they agree to help him. These 4, together, would become known as Ultimus. Several days later, Peter McCain arrives at the Rising Sun facility after being told to rendezvous here by his handler Cornelius Purnell. Flying over the facility, he jumps out of his plane, however, his parachute gets caught in the rafters of the building. He dies shortly after. Purnell is then promoted to Station Chief of the CIA at Groom Lake in Nevada, where a large deposit of element 115 was discovered in 1937. After leaving Doris, Ultimus, Richtofen, Takeo, Nikolai and Dempsey travelled to the Rising Sun facility to collect Richtofen's diary. Upon reading it, Richtofen begins to form his plan to defeat Samantha. An outbreak then occurs, forcing them to fight for their lives. A week later, they return to Doris, where Ultimus Richtofen planned to use the teleporter to return to the moon and confront Samantha. However, as they're battling against the zombies, they step into the teleporter, fire the Wunderwaffe DG2, which overloads the teleporter and sends Ultimus through space-time to their next destination.